Hey, welcome to Wait, That Really Happened, a podcast about history, true crime, and conspiracy. I am new to this podcasting thing, and it is a one-woman show, so I'll do my best to be consistent with posting, but I'm not going to make any promises right now. The bevy for the epi is coffee, because I'm a college student and I am tired. Today, I'm going to be looking at the Night Witches, which was a topic introduced to me by the goddesses of podcasting, Georgia Hardstark and Karen Kilgariff, on My Favorite Murder. Definitely go check them out if you haven't. I was so intrigued by what I heard from them, and honestly, what really made me want to make this episode was I showed my mom their episode, and she was like, wow, I've never heard of them before, which was shocking because my mom is so into history, especially like female history and things like that. So I was like, whoa, more people need to know about this. So I did my best to do some research and find out more about the Night Witches and learn that there were other regiments of women that existed within this military group. So I was like, heck yeah, man, let's do it. Just a trigger warning, there are a few graphic details towards the end, so just be aware. If that's something that you don't want to listen to, that is totally fine. Just leave if you ever need to. I'm sure most of you know the background of World War II, but just to give you a refresher from that high school freshman history course, because it may have been a few years since then, I will give a brief overview. This is all summarized from a history.com article, and any other sources will be in the description boxes. In 1939, post the signing of the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, the Soviet Union invaded Poland, which was the catalyst for what would be a 6-year war across Europe. In 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, which is kind of seen as the big start of the war. In 1941, Hitler stabbed Stalin in the back, which he tended to do, which caused Russia to turn on Germany. Throughout that time period, through the use of a war tactic known as Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, Germany devastated numerous countries, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, etc. The bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 was the event that obviously caused the US to become involved. And at the tail end of the war between 1943 and 1945, Sicily and Italy, under the power of Mussolini, were main fronts of the war. D-Day occurred in 1944, which was a massive invasion of the Allied powers off the beaches of Normandy in France. The final battle of World War II was the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, which was the bloodiest and resulted in the deaths of 19,000 Allied soldiers and 100,000 German soldiers. Throughout this time, railroads, camps, and bases were set up across Europe and Russia for supplies, weapons and ammunition, food, etc. Sabotaging these areas was a common practice for both sides to string the other side out. Some background on this topic of women being involved in the world wars. In World War I, there wasn't a lot of female involvement in the war. In America, the Rosie the Riveter slogan, "We can do it," was kind of the female way of showing their support and patriotism by keeping things running back in the US. I did happen to go to the American History Museum and stumbled across a tidbit of information that is from, I believe, World War I. And it's that 13,000 women served in the Navy and Marines, and 20,000 served in the Army and Navy Nurse Corps. Besides that, of the 65,000 nurses in the Army and Navy, most were women. So there definitely was considerable female involvement that isn't really talked about. But we also aren't focusing on the US today, we are focusing on Russia. Russia actually did have one notable organized group of women who were deployed during the First World War, and they have the most amazing name, the 1st Russian Women's Battalion of Death. Sick name, like, honestly. And then I saw this in an article, and I honestly find it so wild that this was supposedly the documented purpose for this female group, but it was to, quote, shame men into continuing to fight in the war. So gotta get the girls in there to keep it going, I guess. I don't know. They were active in 1917, and Russia dropped out of the war in 1918, so they didn't have a super long running, but still good to note. If you've heard anything about female aviation in the USSR, which I'm sure most of you have definitely not, you've most likely heard the story of the Night Witches, which is the most talked about unit of the 3 Air Force units. These units were ordered by Stalin to be founded by Marina Raskova, more on her later. The first thing to point out about these units is they were initially intended to just return fire, not drop bombs or fly missions. There were about 400 women in each unit, and they were trained in a small town called Engels. They had to learn the same information as their male counterparts, but they had only a couple of months compared to a couple of years to learn everything they needed. Their uniforms, including boots, were hand-me-downs from the men, so they didn't really fit, and the women had to improvise to make them more wearable. For example, they put bedding into their boots to make them fit, and they had to shove pillows behind them in their planes because the planes were built for like men with long legs, so they couldn't reach like the controls. Where all the units start to become more different is when we start talking about the aircrafts they were given to use. The 588th Bomber Aviation Regiment, also referred to as the Night Witches, had old crop duster planes, Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes, made of canvas and wood, and they couldn't hold very much weight. They had no fancy equipment or radar. They had to account for having 2 bombs in the plane as well as a pilot and a co-pilot. There wasn't a roof in the plane either. It was an open cockpit, so these women were just constantly exposed to extreme cold and weather. As you can imagine, they couldn't fly very fast at all, but these women became experts in maneuvering them. The 588th Regiment did perform sabotage missions on various Nazi camps and railroads to prevent supplies from reaching their destinations. They earned their title the Night Witches because they could cut their engine before reaching their drop point, glide into position, drop the bomb, and fly away. The Nazis would only hear the sound of the canvas and wooden wings flying through the air before the bomb would explode, sounding like witches flying on brooms. So they became super afraid of them, and downing a Night Witch's plane was an awarded feat because they were so hard to anticipate. The planes also didn't have lights, and since there was a lack of advanced equipment, the Nazis couldn't trace them, so they just completely appeared out of nowhere. The Night Witches specifically flew 30,000 missions, and the teams of women would often fly multiple times in one night. So these women were insanely talented and fierce, but I found this quote at the end of the history article, and I think it really sums up the ridiculous difficulty that women faced during wartime, but even after, as they kind of were lost for recognition. Despite being the most highly decorated unit in the Soviet Air Force during the war, the Night Witches Regiment was disbanded 6 months after the end of World War II. And when it came to the big Victory Day parade in Moscow, they weren't included because it was decided their planes were too slow. Really? Their planes that threw 30,000 missions that were made of wood and canvas were too slow, that the Nazis were scared of were too, guys, come on. That was just really heartbreaking for me to read. Moving on to Marina Raskova. Marina Raskova was born in 1912, and as a child, she actually wanted to be a musician. She gave that dream up and focused instead on chemistry and earned a job in a dye factory, where she later married engineer Sergei Raskova. In 1931, she shifted gears to aviation and joined the Aerodynamic Navigation Lab of the Soviet Air Force as a draftswoman, basically an engineering technician who would draw up the plans for the aircrafts. When she was only 19, she became the first female navigator of the Soviet Union, and then soon after became the first female teacher at the Zhukovsky Air Academy. She got a divorce in 1935 to focus on flying, setting numerous distance records. Perhaps the most famous of these is known as the Flight of the Rodina, which was a 600-kilometer flight she performed with 2 other female pilots named Polina Osipenko and Valentina Grizodubova. It was a 26-and-a-half-hour flight, and Marina had to make an emergency landing at the very end due to the flight conditions. The visibility was really bad. So she bailed and parachuted out of her aircraft and survived 10 days without food or water while she walked back to the site. All three made it, and they were the first woman to be awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union Award. Because of this and her other flight accomplishments, Marina gained a lot of notoriety and popularity all the way up the chain of command to Stalin. Like he knew who she was. In 1941, she made a speech calling for female aviators to fight in the war, and Stalin was receptive and ordered the creation of the 3 regiments. Tragically, on January 4th, 1943, Marina and 2 other PE-2s were forced to make an emergency landing due to intense snow and visibility issues while returning to their base on a routine flight, and ended up crashing into the Volga Bank, which is the rocky west side bank of the Volga River, resulting in the deaths of pilots in all 3 planes. Marina's ashes are buried in the Kremlin Wall alongside Polina Osipenko, and she was the first female pilot to be given a state funeral, as well as receiving the Order of Patriotic War First Class Award. All right, so that is all the background information to what I mainly want to focus on today, which is the 125th Guards Bomb Aviation Regiment, also known as the 587th Dive Bomber Regiment. They weren't actually attributed to the name the Night Witches because they had different planes, which I'll get into. So just to avoid confusion on that front, I'll be referring to them as the 587th. From what I read, the other 2 regiments had way better training planes, whereas this group had Sukhoi Su-2 planes, which were old, clunky, and slow. From the pictures I looked at, they seemed way structurally better than the Polikarpov PO-2 biplanes that the Night Witches ended up using, but they weren't really able to be used in as strategic of a way as the Night Witches because they were just like normal old metal planes. So they just kind of had to make do with what they had. Marina was actually the designated leader of this regiment, so with her government and military connections, she was able to upgrade all the Su-2 planes with PE-2 planes, which were brand new at the time and categorized as dive bomber planes that were really difficult to fly. And I will now read a description of them so I don't mess it up, since I know nothing about aeronautical engineering. This was a modern twin-engine dive bomber with a maximum speed of more than 330 miles per hour. With its twin fuselage configuration, it was one of the Red Air Force's most difficult planes to fly and was just coming into production in the spring of 1942. That's why this regiment wasn't active for as long. These planes were brand new, so they had to spend a lot more time learning how to use them, while the other regiments trained on the planes that they were going to be flying. This regiment was also the first and only of the 3 to become a mixed sex group of pilots. The new PE-2 planes required a 3-person crew, a pilot, a navigator / bombardier, I think is how you say that word, and a radio operator / gunner. But the women had only been trained in teams of 2, and with such little time, men were brought on as radio operators and gunners. After Marina died in her landing, she was replaced by a man named Valentin Markov, who had the status of major and was very, very experienced in flying combat missions. The women naturally were very upset about this, and Valentin was also not really sure about his assignment. It did end up working out, though, because he realized that the women were incredibly smart and dedicated. Crazy how that's like a weird concept. And he actually changed how he acted as a leader to better lead them and their missions. A really heartwarming sidebar is that the girls initially secretly nicknamed him Bayonet when he was first hired on and new, but they eventually changed it to Baya, I think is how you pronounce it, which means dad. That's so cute. I love that so much. The more I read about Valentin, the more I really appreciated his progressive and open-minded thinking, so I'm going to read some quotes that he said in 1992. The women in my regiment were self-disciplined, careful, and obedient to orders. They respected the truth and fair treatment to them. They never complained and were very courageous. If I compare my experience of commanding the male and female regiments to some extent at the end of the war, it was easier to command this female regiment. They had the strong spirit of a collective unit. It's hard to fancy how difficult the conditions were for these women. Almost all of them were shot down, and after hospitalization, they came back and flew bravely. 5 women out of the original 400 of the 587th were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, whereas 23 were given that title from the 588th. The 5 were Maria Dolina, Galina Zinkovskaya, Nadezhda Fudatenko, Klavdia Fomacheva, and Antonina Zubkova. Hopefully I said those names kind of right. And I want to just give really brief summaries of who each of these women were because they deserve that recognition. During a bomb drop, Maria Dolina's plane was hit by anti-aircraft artillery, causing a fire. Her escort was gone and it was just her, but she still made the bomb drop on time. On her return to base, still on her own, she was attacked by 6 German fighter planes, but she and her crew made it back alive. She flew 72 bomb missions in all and passed away in 2010. Galina Zinkovskaya was a squadron navigator and flew with pilot Klavdia Fomacheva. Her and Fomacheva were seriously burned during a bailout after a bomb drop because their plane had been hit by enemy fire and both engines had set on fire. There's a fruit fly. They survived 5 aerial battles, and Galina completed 62 bomb drop missions. She died in 1985. A squadron commander with beginnings as a civil aviation pilot, Nadezhda Fedotenko was active in civil as well as frontline airborne operations. She helped evacuate 150 wounded soldiers. In 1943, she sustained a head injury from an anti-aircraft gun during the Cuban air battles. Despite the injury, she kept the plane steady and led her crew to complete the mission. She flew 56 missions just on the P-2 planes and passed away in 1978. Klavdia Fomacheva, who I mentioned earlier with Galina Zinkovskaya, was involved with military flight beginning the first day the Germans invaded the USSR. She intended to join as a volunteer of the frontline flying service, but was accepted into Marina Raskova's bomber regiment. On one mission, Klavdia was severely injured by debris, but could not leave her navigator, Galina, whose leg was injured, preventing her from bailing out. Klavdia successfully landed the plane in friendly territory, but suffered severe injuries, including 6 fractured ribs. She healed and was flying again just a few months later. Overall, she performed 56 missions. Klavdia died in 1958 due to illness. Antonina Zubkova was in her 4th year of university when the Germans invaded and was recruited as a navigator by Marina Raskova due to her in-depth knowledge of math. Antonina was on the flight with Nadezhda when Nadezhda was severely injured, and Antonina had to land the plane while Nadezhda commanded the crew. Antonina also took on the job of photographer, taking images of completed missions, consisting mostly of bomb sites, as well as relaying information from enemy troops. She completed 56 missions, resulting in the bombing of 3 ammunition depots, 3 trains, 12 tanks, 50 vehicles, and 5 machine gun points. Tragically, she committed suicide in 1950, 3 years after giving birth to her daughter. In total, the 587th Regiment completed 1,134 missions and dropped over 980 tons worth of bombs that destroyed enemy camps, rail lines, supply and ammunition stations, and communication lines. They flew missions in Stalingrad, the Don Front, and Belarus in Soviet Union territory, as well as in Lithuania. The regiment took part in major turning point battles throughout the war and notably played an important role in Operation Bagration, I think is Bagration, a large-scale offensive in Byelorussia in 1944. That is all I have for the 587th and 588th. I really enjoyed researching these powerful women. It was really inspiring to read their stories and all their achievements. They were clearly very instrumental on the Allied powers' journey to victory, and they should be remembered for their sacrifices and all the work they did. I thought a lot about how to end podcast episodes, and something I really love are Am I the Asshole posts on Reddit because they're kind of ridiculous and can be a lighthearted note to end on. So I'm going to pick a short one at the end of each episode and give my opinion. This was posted by Reddit user livingad7625. Am I the asshole for not inviting my child-free friend to my twins' birthday party? My twins turned 5 this month. They both started school last September, and I put them in separate classes as I wanted them to be more independent. When it came to inviting kids for their birthday, I invited both classes, as at my kids' school, if anyone has a birthday, they will invite the whole class, with some of the parents being kind enough to invite both twins, despite one not being in the class. The guest list was just under 50 kids because of this. That is a huge birthday party. Just as a side note, that is like too many people. The twins are now at an age where they will remember their birthday, so I wanted the guest list to reflect who they would want, although previously I have invited my friends and their kids to the twins' birthdays, including child-free friends as honorary aunties and uncles. Planning their 5th party was a bigger effort than I thought, and although I originally planned to do it myself at home, I rented a soft play center my kids love. I also invited a few family friends who had kids around my twins' age, but not the child-free friends, as it was a soft play center and I didn't think it would be fun for them, and I was being charged per person turning up, so wanted to cut costs as they wouldn't be using the soft play area. I got a call from my child-free friend Lily, who mentioned that a mutual friend told her about the twins' birthday, and she was upset she wasn't invited as their auntie. I explained to her it was a soft play center and that was a kid activity. The twins have their own friends that they wanted, and I didn't want them to feel like it was my party. Most of my other child-free friends weren't really that bothered about not being invited, but Lily and a few others said they wanted to be involved. My husband thinks we should throw a family party and invite the child-free friends to compromise, but to me it seemed like an apology when I don't think we've really done anything wrong by not including Lily and other child-free friends. I will apologize if I'm in the wrong, but I don't really know how to navigate this, as me and my husband are one of the first in our friend groups to have kids, and I guess it was slightly unexpected for them not to be invited, as they have been included on every other birthday of the twins and their big milestones. What was your username? LivingAd7625. You are not the asshole. Your friend is being immature. It is a soft play center. They are not helping you pay for it. It is not your fault. That is my thought on that. If you have any cases, conspiracies, or historical moments you want covered on the pod, feel free to leave them in a comment on Apple Podcasts or Instagram, or email me at wtrhappened@gmail.com. I will also be posting pictures from each podcast episode on my Instagram, as well as podcast announcements. So if you want to follow me, then you can go ahead and find me at the Social Butterfly WTRH. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.